Welcome back in, everybody. It's another edition of the First and Orange podcast. Parker Gabriel here, Luca Evans there, your friendly neighborhood Broncos beat reporters at the Denver Post. It's summer, but I guess what is summer school, Luca? Is that what we're doing? Why are we still doing this if it's summer break?
That's a great point. We're just keeping up appearances.
Yeah,
Look
right.
at you keeping up appearances. New haircut, new cut.
Well, I don't have flow like you, so I have to keep
Nah,
it to prevent any embarrassment. So
no, that's solid.
it's
Good
it's the kind of thing you do when you hit summer break, when you got a little extra time on your hands. Although it turned into sort of a busy few days since the Broncos finished minicamp on the potential maybe new stadium front, which we'll get to later in the podcast. But for right now, Luca, obviously we've sort of hit the dead zone here in the NFL. The Broncos were active all the way up to the end, obviously, with the minicamp. With signing J.K. Dobbins in the midst of said minicamp.
Yep.
So I guess let's start big and then we'll get granular from there. You've now been on an NFL beat. You've seen minicamp practices. You've seen OTA practices. What do you know or think you know about the Broncos now that maybe you didn't know or didn't think you knew 5 weeks ago?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think Sean Payton would probably say that you don't know anything until you put pads on or
don't start counting
or something. Yeah, don't start counting. Don't wait for the pads or whatever. But I would say, to me, maybe that not that I didn't know this, but it just feels like this team. There's not like you can't like point somewhere and go, oh, this is a weakness that they need to shore up right now. Like at this point, like there's question marks. Sure, like do Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton stay healthy? Do they look recovered? How does this running back room shake out? Like, what does Bo Nix look like in year 2? But there's no area you can point to and be like, this could be their downfall, or this, there's a few potentials. But I think that's, certainly kind of an encouraging sign for fans on the direction of this franchise. Just from coming into the market and hearing about how futile things were, for years. It's an exciting time. I think it should be an exciting summer to be a fan. It's just not a lot of problems. It feels like with any organizationally, with it's kind of an interesting front from there's just not much going wrong. So that's my big picture existential takeaway. I would say the second thing, and you wrote about it, but since we're talking so much about quarterbacks as part of our job, I think Bo Nix just kind of looks the part to me as someone who is just operating with command, control. Like if I never watched football and I came to Dove Valley, this past week and was just trying to look at guys and see who the alpha in the room is, I think I would, I could point to Bo Nix as maybe one of a handful of guys. And I think that's just an encouraging sign too for his development heading into year 2. The fact that he's trash talking defense, the fact that he's talking with his receivers after every play, it's just clear that he's the guy. And I think that's just a pretty obvious thing.
Yeah, that was, I think, the thing that I totally agree with you on. Like, it's hard to know. It's hard to look out there and say, like, oh, yeah, Troy Franklin's going to have a breakout season.
Yep.
you see good things. He looks explosive. He looks maybe a little bigger. He's never going to be like a thick, strapped receiver. He's just really lean. But, there's things like that. Oh, probably a positive first impression of RJ Harvey.
Yep.
There's a lot of, individual things. But none of that maybe it matters, but it doesn't really matter until you're in pads and you see it, camp, preseason game, obviously regular season. But so that, to me, it's like the vibe check kind of, and
Yep.
Bo Nix passes it with flying colors. Yep. Like that was, to me, it's kind of funny, Luca, because even when you get to the second half of a season, college coaches say freshmen aren't freshmen anymore. NFL coaches say rookies aren't rookies anymore. Mm-hmm. And when you're a quarterback who starts his whole rookie year, that sort of timeline gets accelerated even faster than that. So it's just kind of like everybody does how do you feel this year compared to last year and all that. But you do have to sort of remind yourself every now and again that a year ago this time, Bo Nix was ostensibly competing for the starting job with Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson. Now, I mean, like, everyone sort of knew or figured what was going to happen at the end of, that quote unquote competition, but he still had to do it. He still had to win the job. You're still sort of waiting for him to look comfortable and all of that. And so, like, the difference between a year ago and now, like, it should be a lot. It should be big. The difference should be substantial if you have a franchise quarterback, but it is, like, and it looks a lot different. It feels a lot different. It sounds a lot different. And seems like just about everybody in the building is willing to put this guy at the front of the line and say, okay, it's your show. So that's obviously a major difference. And then, I mean, not to cover the same ground, I just couldn't agree with you more on the roster part of it. I mean, someone asked me this week about, weaknesses on the roster. And it's not like they're just, oh man, wow, they have incredible depth at every position. But, I mean, like, if Evan Ingram got hurt, that would hurt them. But at the same time, like, they did manage that room last year without him, and it was okay. It wasn't great, but they won 10 games. Similar at running back, like, you really want J.K. Dobbins and R.J. Harvey to be healthy, for the long haul. Tackle, I mean, I don't know. Like, we saw a little bit of Matt Parrott and a little bit of Alex Balcheski last year. Seems like one of the positions along with defensive line where, like, that's where maybe you would just see the biggest drop off if one of those guys miss a lot of time. But just, like, in general, the difference in terms of overall, roster health and roster depth compared to, like, when I started on the beat in 2022 is sort of night and day. Like, they don't have a position where you're like, man, they're on the razor's edge. Like, if one guy gets hurt, what are they going to do with this position?
Yeah, 1,000%. Yeah. And I think they have a good amount of, like, intriguing young depth at a variety of positions, which is always a good thing. I mean, you look at, like, the secondary with, like, guys even who are on the fringes, you can point to and say there's upside here, like, Chris Abrams Drain in the secondary, or like LaBelle Bailey at linebacker, or, just a variety of guys who you could project to step up if there was an injury. And, there are question marks. And I think, like, maybe the top end roster talent isn't as obvious as, some teams across the league, but defensively, I mean, it's certainly there. And then to return to Bo, I think one thing I would say, and we're, like, a long way off from any possibilities here, but, like, it is possible that he has somewhat of a quote unquote sophomore slump, or, just isn't as good in his second year because defenses adjust to him or something, and still ends up a better quarterback for it in the long haul. Like, I think when I see a lot of discourse around Bo Nix being like, oh, he looks more comfortable, he looks more settled, that means you can project X, linear upwards growth. Like, it doesn't always work. Like, this is two completely different quarterbacks, long way off, but, like, look at, like, Baker Mayfield in his first year, like, had a really good rookie year, really bad sophomore year, and now he's, like, a better overall quarterback than he was 5 or 6 years later. Like, that type of development. So I would say that's possible for like, I don't think you can say 29 TDs last year, he looks more comfortable this year, he's going to throw for 35,
100%.
I don't think you can make that jump. I think it's even possible he takes, like, a slight statistical steps back in some categories, but is still kind of a better quarterback in some ways. So I don't know. I would just say that's my possible outcome.
Totally. And he's like, I think he obviously, like, Sean Payton has said that he's surprised even sort of, like, the Broncos staff with how fast he was and how good of a runner he was. And, like, you're always walking the fine line. It's easy to say, oh, he's a rookie, whatever, let him run as much as he wants. But, like, the guy did end up with transverse process fractures in his back against the Raiders in the middle of the season. And so, like, you're always, the more valuable he gets, overall as a player, the less, like, you want to put him in harm's way. And yet it's an important part of his game to, like, run the read option stuff, be mobile, be outside the pocket and all of that. And so, like, one of the things I was talking to someone, like, one of the ways that defenses are going to adjust to him, and I'm sure it started to over the course of the second half of the year and all of that, is like at some point you need to take the legs away and you need to maybe deploy a little bit more resources to him because he can, destroy an angle and get 12 on 3rd and 8 or whatever. And so like, that's all like teams will be better equipped and have better plans for sort of like how to do that. But he also, as the year went on, he was able to push the ball down the field a little bit more and all that. So like there's always the cat and mouse game. Yeah. And that obviously will be a big part of what they do. I think, you wrote about this, like the continuity, like Bo's sort of giddy talking about the continuity. He's like, no, it's not just the offensive line. It's like everything, or not just the play caller. It's everything, it's the offensive line and the receivers and the this and the that. And obviously they've put some new pieces around him too, but there is a sense of like, even though they've upgraded at several positions, tight end, running back, safety, inside linebacker, like there's a sense that the core of this team is back. And I think, I was talking to someone last week about how that's like, it's intentional because you have good players and you had a good year and you want to build off of that. But it also is like the single thing more than anything that's been lacking for this franchise over the last decade. You would say two things: quarterback continuity. They've just churned through coaches, churned through quarterbacks, churned through everything basically. And now it's like you've grasped it and you want to like see how much growth this group in particular sort of can have in baseball.
Yeah, I think you can throw a dart in like 3 years' time back at any like decision from this offseason and say, if it doesn't pan out, you can say, oh, maybe that wasn't the best decision. But I don't think you can make an argument that the overall direction that things have gone, in the past year or so is bad. Like you can't really find fault with that. I think a lot of that has to do with, fairly steady and involved ownership and obviously the continuity with Sean Payton and George Payton. Let's talk about, I want to get your thoughts on, because a week ago you're writing a mailbag on, do they need J.K. Dobbins?
Yeah.
Do they really? And it came away with like, maybe he's an injury prone guy.
I said no.
Carry. Yeah.
No, they don't need him.
They sign him. I think the majority of, Broncos country is pretty happy about the signing. You see it, it makes sense. But, what are your thoughts a week or so removed from JK coming in?
Yeah, it's funny because I think it's like almost literally just what you said about sort of like the offseason moves in general. Like there's part of me that's like, I just think that why not run it a little longer with the young guys that you have and see if you have enough. And that was sort of the point I made, was like, sure, you can do it. You have the cap room and all that, but like you keep saying that you want opportunities for all these young guys, and adding a veteran to the room is like it's a zero-sum game. I'm not counting heads here, Sean, if you're listening, which you're assuredly not. But like, you just like, at some level, there's only one ball and you only have so many guys. And so like, if you really want these young guys to all get opportunities, like adding a veteran to the room who, like you can make an argument. I think you can make an easy argument that it's not necessary. At the same time, like they're clearly, the argument for adding him is just as easy. They're clearly pushing their chips to the middle. They have the cap room. He's a good player when he's healthy. He may not be healthy all year, but you have a bunch of running backs you're working through. And, say what you want. Like it's easy to look at it and say after the first 2 weeks, he averaged 3.8 a carry for the rest of last year.
Yeah.
And then Brandon Jones walks up to a podium and goes, he was one of the best guys we've faced all season. Like, Guess which one probably carries more weight, right?
Yeah.
Like the
Vance
guy who tackles people for a living. Yeah. Vance and Brandon Jones saying this guy's really good carries a lot more weight than looking at the stat sheet and saying, I don't know, he didn't average that many yards most of the season.
Yeah. And I think, it just, to me, it signals that, like you said, they're pushing their chips in. Sure, they could sit back and give RJ Harvey a ton of touches in year one, and I'm sure he still will get a ton of touches, but you could count on Audric Estime to take a leap. You could count on this or that, but it's kind of, you bring in almost like a volatile sure thing
Right.
to where he's going to produce if he's healthy, and if he's not, like you have a backup plan. The interesting thing for me that I've been trying to sort out mentally is that, like, we know now that they were in on him since free agency
For sure.
opened, and
Yep.
like in some capacity those conversations continued over the months. Maybe they waxed and waned, in terms of talking about terms, and obviously, Dobbins wanted kind of evaluation that he was looking for, and then the Chargers slap him with a tender, and the timeline kind of gets sped up. So to me, it's interesting and saying, like, behind the scenes, did Denver want this or pushing for this all along, like, or did they, what was the contingency plan, I suppose. But I mean, I think either way, it signals that, they're they want as much upside as they can get. Like you said, they have the cap room for it, and he's just, he's floating out there. He's a good player, so makes sense.
I think some of it probably is about the number, right? Like, it's easy for a player to ask for one thing in March and know that, players and agents don't think in these terms, like, but somewhere in the back of your head you do, of like, I'm hoping to get this, and if I don't, I know that, later in the offseason I can get X. And like, he didn't get a ton of money, but he still got like, decent 1 year money and all that. Like, it sort of reminds me of Justin Simmons last year. He came off such a productive run with the Broncos, and his market just wasn't what it was just a bloodbath for veteran safeties in general.
Yep.
And he still ended up getting good money, not until like into training camp with Atlanta. And obviously he didn't have the tender hanging over him like JK did and all that.
Yep.
So that's all part of it. I mean, and I think, like, if the Broncos, like, if they wanted to give him 10 million, they could have done that, 2 months ago or whatever. And so, like, I imagine they knew that it was possible he would end up somewhere else if the market developed, and it didn't. So it's sort of like one of those where you look at it and you say it's probably a good read by the team on, like, the way ultimately, you think it's going to go. And then, I mean, I'm fascinated by ultimately, like, what the role ends up looking like, because it seems pretty obvious they have big plans for RJ Harvey. I mean, just listen to Sean talk about the kid, and they loved him in the draft and all of this. And, like, I think a guy like J.K. Dobbins, like, you sort of automatically assume that he'll be at the top of the room, and maybe he's out there, as the starter in the first snap or whatever. And at the same time, like, literally the one knock on the guy is that he hasn't stayed healthy. So, like, if you can get the good explosive version and also not overwork him and keep him fresh through a season. And, like, RJ Harvey's the kind of guy who, like, if you look up at the end of the year and he has 60 catches, you're like, wow, they didn't even throw him the ball in college. Like, I don't think you'd be shocked given the way Sean Payton operates. And so at this point, like, doesn't really seem like it's going to fully look like Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara. No. And then when you look past Dobbins and Harvey, it's like Jaleel McLaughlin is not really like your typical third down back, like, in terms of skill set, but he's, like, also pretty obviously the third guy of that group at this point. Now, maybe Audric Estimé can, like, catch, surpass, whatever, but, like, you start to think about roles and count heads and, whatever. Like, I don't know who's going to make the roster and who's not among that back group, but I do know that they have, like, this collection of interesting players that all have, like, valuable things that they do. I just don't quite know how, like, the eggshell mosaic fits together at this point.
Yeah, that's the most fascinating room to me entering training camp, like, by a wide margin, because like you said, there's just so many guys that can do so many different things and only so much space. And I think, we've been, like, it's easy to just project, like, oh, J.K. Dobbins is a stocky, like, between the tackles type of guy, and RJ Harvey's going to be, is watching film on Darren Sproles and think, power and speed, and this is how the tandem's going to work. But when you look at it realistically, J.K. Dobbins, if they wanted it, like, he's a 3-down back. If you want him to be, like, he can do, when he's healthy, he can do pretty much everything. Like, he's pretty good in pass pro, from everything that I understand. He caught 32 balls last year with the Chargers. He did more in the pass game in college. Like, he can, wear a lot of different hats. And I think when you really zoom in, the profile is not all that dissimilar from RJ Harvey. Like, they're different backs, but,
Right.
and so maybe this is more of a matter of like, you're leaning on both at different times. Maybe you're leaning on RJ Harvey, like you said, to keep J.K. Dobbins fresh. Maybe, maybe RJ does turn into a little bit more of that 50 catch type of guy. But I think it's going to be more of like an overlapping 1-2 punch. It could end up being more that than like, we're turning to you for this and we're turning to you for this. Like,
right.
That type of stuff.
It's not quite like, to use an old reference of the school used to cover, like, it's not Lendale White and Reggie Bush, like thunder and lightning in that way. They're a little bit more like, if you just have two good backs, then like, great, you can deploy them however you want. And they've run into this before. I mean, Jaleel McLaughlin's rookie year, he touched the ball like 74% of the snaps he was on the field. Like, when he came on the field, defenses just went like, oh, that guy's getting the ball. Yeah. And it was pretty much that simple. So like, you want your backs to be able to do different things, obviously, and all of that. It's funny. I was talking to Jaleel during minicamp, wrote about it this week. We asked him when he got to the facility that day, and he was like, "Oh, nothing crazy, 440 this morning." So he's just like doing his normal thing. I was like, he said, he's back in the building the same week as when they lost to Buffalo, and he's basically like, he's having a baby, and so they're having a baby shower in North Carolina this past weekend. Then he was getting right to work, and I was like, some people say that like the recovery part of it is important, and he was like, no, I don't believe that.
Yeah,
like, no, I just work. Like, all there is. He said, I just think the hard work works. So he's an interesting dude, and certainly like with where he came from and what he's been through and how hard, how the odds that have been stacked against him to get to this point. Like, you just don't expect him to go quietly, obviously, in this conversation. Not that you do with Audric Estime or Bidet or Blake Watson either. Blake Watson, we didn't see much of this offseason. He was around working on the side field, some sort of injury. He's walking around, so there's that. But like, it just, I don't know. Somebody will end up on the practice squad, or two guys maybe, and at the end of the day, maybe they'll retain most of these guys some way, shape, or form. But and injuries also, can always hit in camp. But man, that's a hot competition. Come training camp. Obviously receiver, like, maybe it's more about practice squad in terms of like retention and then roles. But like, how do you? It probably just legitimately is too early to have a feel on the like Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, Pat Bryant group, and like, who's the guy in that group that ends up playing 60% of the snaps, and who's the guy that ends up playing 20.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it seems like, just kind of from what we saw at minicamp, like, I think Sean had that comment a while back about how Marvin Mims and Troy Franklin kind of overlap at the Z sometimes. And to me, it seems like Mims is the guy who, like, he's the starter right now. And so that leaves, where does Troy Franklin kind of phase in? And I don't think, like, you can point to all of them and say, just peripherally, they look better than, they did. Like, Vele was blowing us away from, what we saw in OTAs before, he was out during minicamp. And Franklin, like you said, looks bigger. I think the biggest question to me is how and where Troy Franklin gets used. Because I don't, I think Mims like turned the corner last year, and it's hard to imagine him going back to like, what was
having
it?
8 catches in 9 games
or whatever. Yeah. It's hard. It's they and I think just from the way, and not to get into like schematics or anything, but from what we saw in minicamp, like, it seems like he's going to be featured sometimes.
Yeah.
And so, that leaves, and to me, I think Pat Bryant, weirdly enough, is kind of the X factor in that room, because you look at it, he's like, oh, he was making plays all throughout camp, but in profile and frame, he's very similar to Cortland Sutton. Obviously, Cortland Sutton isn't going to come off the field very often. Like him, Vele, and Court are kind of all in this similar-ish.
Yep.
Obviously, Vele's playing more in the slot, so but Pat is a guy. Again, talking to, I think I wrote a story a while back on Illinois as an offensive analyst, Mike New, who used to work with Sean Payton. He was like, he watched a ton of Pat Bryant tape, and he was like, oh yeah, that's a Sean Payton guy, because you can basically deploy him in every receiver slot. So I think maybe he just kind of ends up picking up a lot of action in a variety of places. That's also kind of an interesting one, where I think you can like project the starters, and then the rest is like, I don't know what the snap share is from there.
Yep. We didn't get Court in the group interview setting, I don't think, through the offseason.
Yeah, that's
program,
true.
Which is funny, because last year when he skipped all the voluntary stuff, then he came to minicamp and he talked during minicamp.
Yeah.
Said he was at a stalemate with the club and all of that. He was like in a great place. I saw him in April, and he said he thought the talks on an extension were like moving in the right direction and all of that. And I don't have any reason to doubt any of that. Like, nobody would really be surprised if it's like, eve of training camp, 2 weeks in, whatever, and there's a 3-year extension for Cortland Sutton. There's just like this little nagging part of me that's like, he's in the last year of his deal. He's going to cost probably $25 million a year.
Yep.
If you have like multiple young guys that you feel really good about, some of whom do similar things, and you can't pay everybody $25 million a year.
Yeah.
So like, at some level, like, are we 100% sure it's going to happen? That just is a thought that enters my mind. I'm not reporting anything. I don't even think it's not going to happen. Like, I don't really, but like, there's just this one, I just catch myself every now and again going like, man, Sean loves their young receivers.
Yeah.
And he's going to be expensive. Like that, those two things can coexist blissfully for many years down the road. And then there's just this nagging part of me sometimes that wonders like, well, maybe it won't. That
was like the verbal equivalent of like, that gif of the guy who's like he's got the boiling pot on the stove, and he opens the lid and then like drops it in, drops it. Okay? Yeah. I kind of agree with you. Like, I mean, yeah, it's very, but you have it's like peripherally, and I think we'll probably get a better feel for this in training camp once we see a little bit more of like utilization and different skill sets. But it feels like on paper they have a few guys who overlap, and like Court is certainly in that group. So that'll be interesting. It feels like, and I have, again, nothing to base this on, but it feels like right now Zach Allen and Nick Bonito might be more likely to get extended than Cortland Sutton if you're making like a ranking.
Yeah.
I don't know. I have no idea if that's true or not. I'm just going off pure gut.
If I were guessing, I would say Zach's probably at the front of the line. Yeah. Bonito, I mean, we'll see. Like, I'm not saying he's not going to get an extension. He will. Yeah. But, like, I could see he's in the same boat that Jonathan Cooper was in last year.
Yeah.
Last year was rookie deal. Good player who's ascending. Obviously, like, the sack numbers and all of that. Like, he's in a different realm in terms of, like, what he's going to get paid and probably his value league-wide compared to Cooper.
Yeah.
But, like, contractually, he's not in a different place than Cooper. He's a second-round pick rather than seventh. But, like, they extended Cooper week 9 of his rookie year. So, like, if we get to the end of training camp and it's going, there's no Bonito extension, like, I think the bye week or mid-year thing is very possible with him. I mean, that's how they've handled rookies who get big extensions in the past. Pat, not Pat last year, but even Pat, it was like Wednesday of week 1. So you never know. Someone comes to the table and says, here's my number, and you agree, like, it happens fast. But, like, I'll be surprised if Benito's the first one. I think he might be, he could be a mid-year guy. And then it's Zach. And then it's just a question of, like, are you putting the rest of that money with Court? Are you putting it toward JFM? Is there somebody else? You know, and the thing with Court, like I said what I said, I guess, but like the counter argument is incredibly easy to make. Like you have a young quarterback who fully trusts Cortland Sutton, and last year there were times where it looked like Sutton was the only guy he trusted. He had the best year of his career last year. Like there's a very easy case to make for just like giving him $24 million a year, 3 more years, and saying like, they do some of the same things, but we know this guy's really good, and these other guys might end up being good. So like that could well be the way it goes too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. What do you make of suppose we'll touch on this before the stadium stuff, but what do you make of Sean Payton's Nick Bonito snap count comments that, for context, basically Sean Payton pointed to, said Nick Bonito's a great player, but we, if you did your homework last year, he had a lot of usage. Basically, we need to be mindful of his snap count. He played like 100 less snaps than Jonathan Cooper did last year, and was like 22nd in the league amongst edge rushers. So
he also made a series of like game-altering plays. In December, like it wasn't like he wore down and was ineffective late in the year. I mean, a conspiring mind might say like, oh, he's going to be more expensive if he gets 16 sacks than if he gets 12.
But I don't think they're
Sometimes Sean's is a fascinating guy to cover. Like there's never a dull day. Like there's not a complaint at all. But like you learn people and how they especially like how they talk over the course of time. And like one of the things with Sean is like you could probably do an analysis of this. Like he spoke in much higher terms about Pat Surtain like after Surtain inked a long extension than he did before. And like some of that's just gamesmanship. It's not like he's not complimentary of Nick. He is, but like he'll be one of the elite pass rushers like after he signs a deal. And that's not like, I don't mean that even in a glib way. Like, I just don't think Sean's probably interested in providing the quotes that like Nick's agent's going to bring to the negotiating table and say like, well, you said this about him, like that doesn't, doesn't change how good a player Nick Bonito is based on like what Sean says about him at the podium now compared to a year from now. So like, I don't know. I mean, I think like, he's a really good player. He's really come into his own. He's got elite, pass rush capability that's coveted in the league. Like the Brinks truck is coming his way. It's just a matter of if it's in, August or November or next year.
Yeah. Well, he's the bloodhound. We've got to.
That's right.
That's his self.
I like that. We got new nicknames. We could have done.
Yeah,
we could have done a whole journal on all the new nicknames.
That's true.
The offseason program.
There's never,
the Bloodhound and the Cleaner being the two most prominent.
That's true. I do like. We'll have to. I think we'll have to see what sticks in training camp. That's the real barometer.
Evan Ingram said he thinks of himself as the cleaner. Then he says he does everything right, like every rep all the time. And maybe I'm missing something, Luca, but like I was sort of like, okay, why the cleaner?
Yeah.
Like you clean up mistakes or you operate cleanly. Like I didn't quite catch the connection between what he said his nickname was and then like why. But he's he's an interesting guy. I'm sure we'll get a better answer on that in camp.
I mean, to me, I think it's just the dependable.
Yeah.
Like he's the vet. Like he's had a heck of a career arc. Like he's seen a lot of it. So maybe it's like, I'm gonna clean up, when Bo Nix is scrambling for his life, I'm gonna box someone out and be there. So
makes sense. See. All right. I think you're on a good path with it.
We'll see. Yeah. I went through the same process while I wrote that story. So that's how I interpreted it, but I could be wrong.
The one day, Luca, that I didn't see much football out there was on Wednesday because I ended up working on some stadium related stuff. All like still.
Yep.
It's not nebulous. I mean, there's obviously real things happening. And this is like, we know this about the Broncos process. Like even as they've said, like relatively similar things over the last 2 years, like that doesn't mean that it's like stasis behind the scenes. Like there's things happening. And so like the developments essentially over the last week or 10 days it's not even like things that have happened over the last 10 days. It's just things that have been reported over the last weeks. We know that there's a sort of like focus at this point on the Burnham Yard site and that's like, there's a focus on the reporting. It's not like, it's not necessarily that the Broncos have zoomed in. You could look at it and come to that conclusion.
Sure. I mean, they've invested a lot of money into buying land around. So I think objectively there is a focus there. Maybe there's a focus other places too.
Yes, there could be focus other places too, but there is a focus there. Yeah, that's 100% right. And so, there's a bunch of properties that have sold last fall, mostly into the spring around Burnham Yard, a bunch of different LLCs. We haven't independently tied all of those LLCs to the Broncos. Business Den cites a source that says that it is them. So it makes sense that Burnham Yard site is owned. It's 58 acres. It's sort of like right off of I-25. The rail yard itself is owned by the Department of Transportation, State Department of Transportation. It's for sale. They're planning on selling it by next year. There's a couple of other big parcels in that area, Denver Water and a concrete yard. And then there's all these sort of like industrial plots around there. A bunch of those industrial plots have sold to what very much looks like the same buyer based on our reporting over the last several months. So that's one thing that's happening. And then we also know that the Broncos have been in pretty regular communication over the last year with Denver Water, the utility, regular meetings, like even like standing weekly meetings this spring on the calendar, just to sort of touch base. The meetings are literally called like, Denver Water, Denver Broncos, City, County of Denver touch base, weekly touch base. So it's a pretty frequent level of communication. Now, Denver Water points out, I suppose fairly, that doesn't necessarily mean the Broncos want to buy that plot. It just is like anybody who might develop the plot next to theirs would want to understand Denver Water as well. Fair point. That could be all it is. Maybe it's not. We'll see how the reporting shakes out there. But clearly, we late last year in reporting the stadium series pointed to Burnham Yard and the surrounding area as like, hey, listen, if you're looking at Denver but not the current site, like this is a spot. In fact, it might be the spot in the city. Like there's just not that many, areas where there's that much acreage to be had that's literally for sale. Like it's got sort of like a big flashing neon sign around it. And we know that they're also in communication with Lone Tree and Aurora and they can stay where they are. But like it seems, even though not a lot of this stuff has happened in the recent weeks, it definitely has like sort of, it feels like the ball's rolling a little bit more on the stadium front.
And there's a variety of like potential outcomes and options with that. I think one thing that's really an interesting thing, and I'm going to be looking at this in coming months, but if indeed they choose to, in a hypothetical scenario where they choose to develop on Burnham Yard and they buy Denver Water, like presumably they'd want to pour a lot of money into building a kind of modern new era stadium district. And then all of a sudden you'll have like the future of Denver will look completely different in 4 or 5 years time, because you've the NWSL coming and building on Santa Fe Yards, building a new district there. And then you have Ball Arena and the Cronkies and KSC potentially, with a whole redevelopment plan along River North, which is right next to it. And so you have it's going to be a really interesting development from a real estate perspective. But maybe all this never comes to fruition. So
what's interesting? Like I'll just make one point, and I don't know what's going to happen. I think like the Burnham Yard stuff, like, I mean, obviously there's smoke there, that doesn't mean that like, there's just seems like there's probably a long way to go on this still. And long way. I mean, if you told me 6 to 9 months, I wouldn't blink at that before, something's done. But I'll say like every ownership group that starts down the road of figuring out what to do with the stadium, they look around the league and they see like who's done what. not only like what the state of the art is in terms of the building or the district or the revenue streams, all this stuff, but also like how did, ownership groups and clubs navigate the process of finding a site and all of that. And like, this is going to be oversimplifying it. I don't know all the ins and outs, but like one thing that happened with Chicago is they bought this big plot of land in the suburbs. And then when they wanted to talk about like how the financing would be structured and all of that, like the local utility, the local government out there basically was like, no, you guys don't have another option. So like why they had the leverage, right? They were like, you bought this big plot of land, you spent $180 million on it, and you don't have anywhere else to go. So you're going to play by our rules.
Yep.
And so like, while, $150 million or whatever it is an awful lot of money in terms of like buying parcels and all of that, like $150 million doesn't go that far when you're talking about land costs and stadium costs. And there is a possibility. I don't know that it's a likelihood, but there part of it is optionality. Like that's part of it. And if you're going to negotiate with Lone Tree or Aurora, you want to have somewhere else where you can say, listen, fair deal's a fair deal, but we have other options too, just so you know. And if you want Burnham Yard, if that's your plan A, you need really somewhere else where you can say like, this is what we want. We're happy to work through it. We know there's going to be a lot of, twists and turns and stuff we got to figure out. And there's a lot of people involved in all of that. But like at some point, if we cross the Rubicon, like we have the option to go somewhere else. So that doesn't feel like that's all it is at Burnham Yard, but you could make an argument that like right now, that's what it is.
Yeah, it's true. It's smoke and mirrors or something.
Yeah.
And
all happening right in what would normally be the quietest calendar.
Yeah. We'll see. Could be nothing at all, or we're in for a heck of a summer.
I think it'll. I mean, I don't know. I don't know this. I think it'll. It's rolling now, but I do think there'll be at least another stretch of relative quiet. Like it just seems.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like everybody goes on vacation this time of year. Like there's only so much. Like the negotiating table is still going to be right where you left it, probably. Like 2 or 3 months from now too. So not to say nothing's happening, but I don't know. It doesn't seem imminent yet. Now watch, clip this. Old takes.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out.
That's pretty good. 43 minutes going into the summer.
Yeah.
We'll try to do this periodically through the dead period here. And I mean, goes without saying, late July will be here before you know it, and then we'll be off and running in training camp.
Yes, that's true.
There you go.
There you go.
Luca Evans, Parker Gabriel, DenverPost.com/Broncos for all the latest. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Talk to you next time.